Welcome back to the News Hour. A reminder of our top stories this evening. The US president has defended his choice to authorize the killing of a top Iranian general. Residents and tourists have been evacuated from beaches in South Australia amid warnings of more extreme danger on the way from bushfires. And an employment tribunal has ruled that ethical veganism is a philosophical belief and is therefore protected by law. I want to bring you a piece of breaking news from Lancashire Police, who are appealing for information following an incident of violent disorder in Burnley last night. It was on Hodder Street that they were called about 10 to 7, following reports of a group of around 30 youths wearing balaclavas and in possession of weapons. 3 boys were arrested on suspicion of violent disorder. They remain in custody. No serious injuries were reported, but they have recovered a small number of weapons, and they're appealing for more information about what happened there at Hodder Street in Burnley last night. Let's return now to our lead story, though, the killing of a top Iranian general by a US airstrike. President Donald Trump authorized the attack on an airport outside Baghdad in Iraq, and this move represents a significant escalation of tension with Iran. Could prove to have major consequences. Who was Qasem Soleimani then, and why was he targeted? Major General was the commander of the elite Quds Force, a unit of the Revolutionary Guards in Iran tasked with carrying out military and intelligence operations beyond Iran's borders. He was instrumental in spreading Iranian influence in the Middle East and was pivotal in providing support to the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad against US-backed rebels. The United States was also believed that he was behind attacks on American forces in the region for the past 2 decades and began monitoring his movements with help from Israel and Saudi Arabia. Soleimani became one of the most powerful and revered figures in the country. He's understood to have reported directly to Iran's supreme leader. We can speak now to Robin Simcock. He specialises in counter-terrorism and national security at the Heritage Foundation. Robin, welcome. Thanks for taking the time to speak to us. Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs in France said that we are waking up in a more dangerous world. Do you agree?
Well, thanks. It's great to be with you. I think, we know what the French government are saying on this. There's the fear of retaliation attacks from Iran because Soleimani was such a significant figure that there may be some kind of blowback in terms of an Iranian response. I think my point would be that Qasem Soleimani is someone who has blood on his hands. I mean, this is somebody responsible for various Iran fighting forces around the world. He was responsible in helping plan attacks on US and British soldiers in Iraq between 2003 and 2011. I think a plausible thing to say he's one of the world's most dangerous individuals. And so while I see where the French are coming from on this, I choose to focus on the fact that somebody who has been responsible for so much suffering both in Iran and outside of it is now no longer operating, and I would say that's a good thing. Yeah,
I take your point, and the blood on his hands thing has indeed, I think, been sort of acknowledged by many people, and we've seen celebrations in the streets in the Middle East from some people, and indeed other international powers, you know, admitting the fact that this was a man who directed and authorised a lot of violence. But that can be true at the same time as raising concern about what has taken place, the legality potentially of it, not least the potential effect somewhere like Iraq. I mean, Richard Haas, former advisor to Colin Powell, one sure result of this is that the era of US-Iraq cooperation is over. The result will be greater Iranian influence, terrorism and infighting in Iraq.
Well, yes, I think in terms of the legality, I mean, the US are saying that they, as Soleimani has been responsible in conducting attacks on US citizens, and we've seen some of this towards the end of last year as well, where a US contractor was killed in Iraq, the US say that they are acting entirely in self-defense. I think in terms of the consequences of Soleimani's death across the Middle East, of course, it's only responsible that the US and its allies in the region look at the second, third and fourth order effects. And with Iran, we have to be cognizant of potential kidnapping, of potential attacks on embassies, on attempts to disrupt international markets, possibly even a cyber response. And I think any responsible government would be looking as how to prepare for that. And the US has already begun to move some troops around. It's stationed more in Kuwait in terms of a possible response. But, you know, we may also see Iran bide its time in terms of a response. We shouldn't necessarily expect anything immediate. There's no denying, and I don't disagree with Richard Haas in that it's a very, very significant move. It's one that previous US presidents, especially George W. Bush, contemplated and pulled back from because of Soleimani's importance within the Iranian system. So while we can be grateful that Soleimani can no longer inflict terror and fear on other people, it's only right that we think about what are the consequences now for both the US, its allies like the UK, and the broader Middle East region.
Yeah, just going back to the legality, Agnes Callamard, the UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial executions, has taken real issue with this. She said outside the context of active hostilities, the use of drones for targeted killing is almost never likely to be legal. And this issue of an imminent attack says that effectively the action has to be proportionate, and that test is unlikely to be met in this case. There is this criticism of the United States that the rule of international norms applies to it and no one else.
Well, I suppose the way I would look at this is if we think of US drone activity outside of Iraq, but think of the operations that's taken place in Afghanistan, in Yemen, in Somalia, in Pakistan. There's often a dispute over the meaning, essentially, of imminence in terms of the US responding to imminent attacks. I think the better way to view it is the way the US view it, as an ongoing threat. They see an ongoing threat from individuals within those regions and respond to them like that. And, you know, the US has received a lot of criticism about its drone strike policy in countries like that, but not only has it carried on doing so, I think, with increasingly less criticism internationally, but also those countries have given permission on some and many occasions for the US to carry out attacks within their own borders.
This, isn't it? It doesn't appear that any authorization was, you know, this was an attack on Iraqi soil. They're condemning it. It seems to be done without forewarning of any allies. You know, this is America acting alone, unilaterally, in a sort of post-2003 way as a policeman of the world, in a sense.
I think it's going to get complicated diplomatically between the US and Iraq. I mean, I think there is part of me that thinks it's inevitable that Iraq have come out and said this publicly. We don't always know what is being said privately, but it certainly looks as if this is something that's going to cause problems within Iraq. The US argue that they had intelligence that Qasem Soleimani was planning imminent attacks on US diplomatic service and US embassies, and they were acting in self-defense. But of course, this is the Middle East. It's going to get extraordinarily complex. There's a lot of competing factors going into it, and it's not always black and white, and it's not always easy to carry out actions that are going to be uniformly positive or even uniformly negative. I think the Soleimani case, the US has obviously weighed up the facts on the ground, the damage he has done in the past, and decided that the responsible thing, once it got the intelligence that they knew his movements and that new attacks were being planned, was to carry out this strike. But of course, it's complex regionally.
Robin, thank you for your time. Robin Simcox there.
Thank you.
The Prime Minister's advisor, Dominic Cummings, has invited weirdos and misfits to apply for work at Number 10. You might have seen this in a post on Mr. Cummings' own blog, looking for a range of positions, saying that he wanted to attract super talented weirdos with odd skills. It comes as the government promised seismic changes to the civil service. Let's talk to Mo Hussein, who was a staffer to both David Cameron and Theresa May during their time in Number 10. Mo, good to speak to you. So, does the civil service in Number 10 need more weirdos?
Well, I think it was quite stereotypically colourful language from Dom Cummings. But the wider point I think that was trying to be made was
not the shitbag
should be open to
challenge
and to change, and should be able to attract people from a wider base than it traditionally has, for a variety of reasons. You know, in terms of the kind of country we want to be in the future, where the economy is going, and the political reason, which is the Conservatives have won a very big majority from parts of the country that have never voted Tory before. So, you know, you do think about what are the policies, what are the ideas that will continue to attract people to the party and open up the civil service, the kind of the machinery of government, to people who may feel that they don't have a role in Number 10 or they could never work there.
So do you think the scale of what was sort of outlined by Dominic Cummings as a refresh of the civil service is needed, or do you think it doesn't need to be as drastic as what he might be proposing?
I think over time it is needed, but I think it should be done, kind of slowly and in segments. So you think about everything else the civil service and the government is trying to do at the moment. So having a whole-scale reform very quickly, I would contend, is going to be a bit tricky and a bit difficult in terms of trying to do Brexit and trade deals and various other things that are being discussed. But I think we need to look at what we mean by attracting talent, where do we get it from, and if the future is really going to be about AI and science and research, then I think it's reasonable to have people in the government who actually understand and know these areas and who can advise people who are
It's never been important before for people to know what they're fucking talking about.
To meet the challenges of the future, but I don't think it's going to be an
Far too many experts, if you ask me.
Tongue-in-cheek, or is Dominic Cummings, do you think, deadly serious about this kind of change in Downing Street?
I think he's deadly serious. I mean, I think anybody who has kind of followed his writing, which I appreciate, there may not be that many people, but looking back at his blogs, he has spoken a lot about the need to reform the civil service. Do we even need a permanent civil service? So I think these themes have been quite consistent, and he obviously also speaks from his experience as a special advisor in government. I mean, I've been a special advisor and a civil servant, and I can see, whilst there are some amazing people in the civil service, some of them who are my friends and former colleagues, there are issues around people moving jobs, quite regularly. So you do lose the sense of corporate memory and the kind of history and the knowledge that you might need, especially when trying to deliver big projects. And also accountability. I think with that comes to change. The level of accountability does tend to slip away. So if look at what the Prime Minister has been speaking about, he wants to deliver things like 50 million more different things, better infrastructure, more roads, more buses, more trains, all of that kind of stuff. It just doesn't happen just with more money. Money is important, but what about the technology? What about the ideas? What about the systems of delivering this? The government does not have a great track record in delivering big projects, so maybe it's time to go back to the drawing board and think again about who is around the table when these conversations are happening.
Yeah, speaking of that, just in case anyone hasn't seen this big job advert, I'm just going to read the sort of requirements for Dominic Cummings' personal assistant. He said, this will involve a mix of very interesting work and lots of uninteresting trivia that makes my life easier, which you won't enjoy. You won't have weekday
massive
dates, sacrifice weekends. Frankly, it'll be hard having a boy or girlfriend at all. Exhausting but interesting. Mo, your experience of being in that world, is someone going to apply for that job?
I don't think everybody will be rushing to get their CVs in. I think it will appeal to some people. I mean, I think the tone of what he was saying is certainly not for everyone. It's not really the language that I would put in a job advert myself, but I do think, having been there, that it is refreshingly honest, and I think it would appeal to some people at a certain stage in their careers who are going into it with their eyes open, who are making certain life choices. If you're doing it with the knowledge of what it can be,
prepared to give Dominic Cummings a blowjob.
But I accept that putting it in such bleak, colourful, blunt terms will be a turn-off to some people, which, frankly, may be what he wants. He may want a certain kind of person to actually apply for it.
I've got to ask, have you
Fully qualified stiff.
I have not. I've been there, done that.
Okay, and just finally, I mean, if it's not the first time that someone wants to try to shake up the civil service, do something different. The famous one was the media grid back in Blair's day, I think it was, and then we revert back because it doesn't quite work. Do you think if these changes start being made, they stick, or do they fall to the wayside a bit? Some of these changes.
I think it's a good point. I think sometimes, when you try to do too much too quickly, then inevitably some of these things will fall to the wayside and they'll be seen as a bit, we tried it for a while, it didn't quite work. I think there has to be buy-in from across the top of the civil service at least, and across the ministerial ranks and special advisor ranks. I think if you have that and everybody works together to implement it, then things can change, but it does take time. It's gigantic machine, the civil service, and doing lots of different things. So I think this kind of thing needs to be done in stages.
Mo Hussein, good to speak to you and good to get that exclusive that you won't be applying for a job. So we'll see you again. Thanks, Mo.
Thank you.
You're watching Sky News. This is the News Hour coming up next.
In life, as in football, we all go through highs and lows.
A new film from Prince William that will be beamed into football grounds across the UK. We'll tell you more.
More than 3,500 firefighters are prepared to fight raging bushfires across Australia's most populous state as a severe inferno is expected this weekend. At the peak of the summer holiday period, tens of thousands of holidaymakers have been urged to leave national parks and tourist areas on the New South Wales south coast and eastern areas of Victoria. Temperatures are expected to go above 40 degrees Celsius.
I am very relieved to know that everybody who has wanted to leave the South Coast and southern New South Wales has been able to do so. It's been an enormous relief to have Princess Highway opened, which has literally allowed hundreds and thousands of people to leave the area.
Where unfortunately, very likely we will lose homes tomorrow, but we'll be very happy and we'll call it success if there's no lives lost. But at the end of the day, that's our strategy tomorrow, is to try and minimise how far these fires run, knowing we can't put them out, and making sure then, once we get through tomorrow, then we start looking at containment.
A small home along the Lake Michigan shoreline in Michigan in the US has fallen down a sandy cliff in an area plagued by erosion. The home's owner was at another property when it fell. She wanted neighbours to pitch in for the cost of a shoreline rock wall to slow erosion, but ran out of time. Rising Great Lakes levels and storms have caused beach erosion.
And I looked up and then it was just like this groan, like that was just pulling away from the foundation, then a big boom.
And a sea of clouds has swept over the Lushan mountain in China, attracting many tourists who had come to welcome in the new year. The massive clouds poured into the bottom of the mountain valley, carried by the wind, presenting a magnificent sea of clouds overhead.
Prince William is targeting football fans as he continues his campaign for better mental health. He's made a minute-long film to get the ball rolling, which will play ahead of matches in stadiums across the UK. The film, in collaboration with the charity Every Mind Matters, encourages better self-care, as Sky's Katie Spencer reports.
In stadiums up and down the country, and footballing first.
In life, as in football, we all go through highs and lows.
Every FA Cup fixture will be delayed by exactly 60 seconds so that fans can watch this film narrated by Prince William.
At moments, even the little things can seem a struggle. But we can all start to change things.
fans will be asked to take a minute to think about their mental health, and if they need help, to head to the Every Mind Matters website, an initiative from Public Health England. It's a concept that Rowan Kalicharan wishes had been around while he was struggling for over a decade with undiagnosed bipolar disorder.
I lived in a very isolated, very dark place, and I did attempt to take my life on multiple occasions. It's so important, I think, to get people thinking, speaking openly about mental health. I think football is such an important part of our culture, and it really can be a catalyst for breaking down barriers.
A YouGov survey of over 3,000 people found that of the 78% of men who experienced early signs of mental health concerns, just under half said they'd never taken self-care actions to manage their mental health. And in women, just under a third said self-care wasn't something they'd worked on.
We know that mental health problems are common. 1 in 6 adults will have at any time feelings of anxiety, feeling low or stressed or difficulty sleeping. It's important to recognise that taking simple actions can really help. So reframing thoughts, breathing exercises, taking more physical activity and just connecting better with people can really help and stop these problems progressing.
A longer behind-the-scenes film that's also being released sees famous footballing figures open up about how they cope when life gets too much.
When I have a bad game or look back at things and I feel stressed, I always go home and open up and speak to my family.
My daughter especially, she can take her mind off a lot of things.
Playing guitar, even if it's 5 minutes a day, guitar helps me relax.
Anyone who's struggling is encouraged to come up with their own personalised mind plan through the Every Mind Matters website. Much like a game of football, the idea is to work on practical ways of managing stress so that handling life's ups and downs is a little easier. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Let's have a quick look at the weather before we go.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
This weekend looks rather wet for northern parts, but drier elsewhere. The best of the brightness is in the east. Currently, though, most places have largely clear skies, but it is rather cold and still very windy in the north. Scotland's seeing plenty of showers, the heaviest of which are in northern parts, where there could also be some hail and thunder. Overnight, winds over northern Scotland should ease. Showers will merge together into more persistent rain and possibly snow over the higher ground.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
That's it for the news hour here on Sky News. Thanks for watching. Coming up next, more as President Trump defends his decision to kill a top Iranian general in a targeted airstrike as the country mourns his loss. More American troops are also on their way to the Middle East.
Soti. Soti.
Umpster daisy! Teach monkeys to fly better than that.